Welcome to today's event, Future-Proofing New Construction. I'd like to thank the New York City Accelerator for partnering with us on this event. We are scheduled to end at around 11:30 a.m. And if you want to revisit any of the event, we're going to post the recording and the slides to the event page shortly. I'd now like to hand it over to Joe Chavez, the Deputy Director of the New York City Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice, and our moderator for today.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Joe Chavez. I'm the Deputy Director for the Resilient and Efficient Buildings team at the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice. Our office is the administration and the city's main office for developing policy and initiatives around climate impacts, sustainability, energy efficiency, with the goal of looking out for the best interest of New Yorkers in a changing climate and trying to develop world-leading policies to really take the lead on sustainability and climate for New York City. Today, we are going to be discussing what does it mean to future-proof a city. Developers, designers, builders are all tasked with designing our built environment, and there have been a lot of new policies and regulations over the past decade related to the built environment and also, changing climate storms that have forced us to rethink the way we need to build our city. So, we will be discussing that today. How do we design and build a climate-proof and future-proof city? On our panel today, we have Mike Berry, New Buildings with the New York City Accelerator, Crystal Ning, Senior Associate, Director of Sustainability at Curtis and Ginsberg Architects, Sam Mason, Director of Decarbonization at CodeGreen, and Jennifer Urrutia, Project Manager at Lendlease. I am now going to pass it to Michael Berry, who is going to discuss future-proofing new construction from New York City Accelerator.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for attending today. As you know, New York City is on a pathway to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. In New York City, 68% of the city's emissions come from buildings, and by 2050, 90% of the buildings in the city will still be standing. That means in order to reach carbon neutrality by 2050, we need to tackle the largest contributor of carbon emissions, which is obviously our buildings. The city has passed a series of decarbonization policies, which include the Climate Mobilization Act of 2019. By funding programs such as the New York City Accelerator, the city is providing free technical assistance and opportunities for economic development as we transition to carbon neutrality and look at buildings lasting beyond the future. So with that, can we go to the next slide? I'm sorry, next one. Thank you. Yep, and we can go to the next one. Sorry about that. How can the New York City Accelerator help? The New York City Accelerator is a program to help control costs, meet compliance requirements for local laws, boost building performance across the city, increase energy savings, and reduce carbon emissions across New York City buildings. The Accelerator can provide free technical assistance and guidance to help transform the market on how buildings operate and are built. It helps identify building upgrades and energy conservation measures to upgrade projects to help meet emissions limits, while establishing under Climate Mobilization Act and other local building laws and also building codes. It offers no-cost building operator trainings and supports the green workforce and looks to help develop even a greater workforce in the city. It connects building decision makers with service providers. We want to build the market, not be the market, to implement decarbonization projects throughout the city. And lastly, it helps build and helps buildings identify where applicable financial incentives and financing, such as New York City Accelerator PACE financing options. And we'll also talk about some additional rebates and incentives that are available through the Accelerator team as well. So next slide. So who is eligible to participate in the Accelerator? Anyone who is working with a privately owned new or existing building in the city that's greater than 5,000 square feet. All you have to do is reach out to the Accelerator team and you'll be assigned a dedicated a dedicated account manager that will work with you and come up with a plan to best address your building's needs. Lastly, the best thing about the Accelerator, it doesn't cost anything to participate. And the New York City Accelerator doesn't have any commitment. We're just looking to assist you. We're not looking for you to sign anything. We're here to provide technical assistance and advice throughout the building process. Next slide. As part of the New York City Accelerator, there's a new buildings offer. The new buildings offer supports projects that are new construction or alteration projects throughout the city. These are multifamily commercial buildings, industrial buildings, mixed use. They can be market rate and affordable. They just have to be over 5,000 square feet. But we also can work with houses of worship, schools, and other types of buildings. Next slide. The New York City Accelerator New Buildings Track, it offers educational opportunities to inform building stakeholders on how to best future-proof their project. This will also part of this education and information that's provided focuses on local laws and also how to best address the challenges in the ever-changing code landscape in the city, while also helping to identify some energy conservation measures to drive building performance. We really try to focus on how buildings perform and what we can do to help incremental changes on your projects. Realize that for some buildings and developers and project teams that this is new, and we want to be there to support them, but also make sure that it's being done in a smart, thoughtful, focused way that we can be able to assist and design and help design future buildings in the city. Lastly, we provide technical assistance and support. The Accelerator offers trainings for building professionals. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a future slide, but primarily we offer trainings and technical assistance and technical documentation, and also trainings and offered through training partners like Urban Green Council. Next slide. I touched upon in the last slide the ever-changing code environment in New York City. Obviously, NYSERDA is looking into the new version of New York Stretch Code that will overlay the 2020 Energy Conservation Code. Once that's adopted, we recognize that there's going to be a lot of challenges with projects not only meeting the code, but then also coming into compliance with local laws like 97, 154, and also 92 and 94. Currently on the projects we've been assisting throughout the city, which roughly is just about 100 right now, what we're seeing is that there's a lot of questions around 92 and 94, questions around 97, but even more importantly, what local law 154 is going to look like when we move to all electric buildings in the city. So next slide. One of the things that the new buildings offer will do is it can aid projects in all phases of construction. So these are projects we can get involved. Obviously, the earlier the better. If we can get involved in the early parts of your design development stage, we can make the greatest impact. We realize that time and money are probably the most two important things that any developer is going to focus on. So obviously, if we can get in, make some recommendations so you can then go out and get pricing and get into your financing, we obviously recognize that's very important. We want to focus on how we can help you exceed the energy code in New York City. We find that a lot of buildings that are being built just to code are still struggling in the city with like potential local law 97 fines down the road. Just because it's built to code doesn't mean that it's going to actually not be fined. If it's built just to code, we're finding that projects will most likely face fines down the road. So pushing people beyond the code is obviously something that we're looking to assist with, but we're also looking to also educate on other cutting edge building standards like passive house, where we know that this is not the norm right now in the city to build passive house buildings. But again, our job is to transform the market to look for ways to build better buildings that will stand the test of time. And so with that, we can go to the next slide. So the accelerator provides opportunities for building professionals to help future-proof their projects. This is done through our account managers that I mentioned at the top of my presentation. Once you're assigned an account manager, we're going to work with your building teams to identify ways to future-proof your project. One of the things that we do look at is how to best engage your teams to look for not only the projects you're bringing to us that are new or going through alterations, but we can also work with existing buildings to look at local law 84 and potential impacts again with 97. But again, we do get asked a lot of questions around 92, 94. And for solar, we can provide assistance on solar and also on green roofs as well. Next slide. I'm not going to obviously go through all of these. I mentioned that financing is obviously important. Time and money, obviously very important. We're looking for ways that you can add into your capital stack, different incentives and financing options. The accelerator provides guidance on any applicable rebates for your project. So that could be something through Con Edison, maybe financing through the city itself, through HPD, and also again PACE. And we are excited to also share that steep PACE for new construction, I'm sorry, is starting to roll out, and we anticipate that to be here hopefully by the end of the year. But check in with us because we know this is something that's been very much of interest for folks in the city. Next slide. So the one of the things that we want to make sure that we're doing is that the recommendations that we're making are not only cost effective, but like I mentioned earlier, that we're looking to help make incremental changes on these projects. We realize that we don't want to push people in the deep end of the pool. We want to make sure that they have all the tools that they need to build their projects right. But when you participate in the accelerator, especially the new buildings offer, we do offer a marketing toolkit with materials that help promote your affiliation with the accelerator, but also promote the performance of your building, shows that your building is a top performer, and it helps us also identify projects in the city where we can have a point of reference to say, this project has been built this way, this project has been built this way. So when we do hear from people that, you know, a certain typology of building can't meet passive house standards, we can say, actually, they do, and here's an example of one. We also provide technical documentation. We have certain primers on all electric buildings, primers on local law 97, on VRFs and other technology. So beyond the training that I'm going to discuss next, we have a great technical resource library that we can provide for projects that are interested in learning more on different aspects of building in the city. Next slide. So the New York City Accelerator provides trainings, especially through the new buildings track. We're focused on training building professionals throughout the city. We launched 2 years ago the New York City Accelerator Learning Center. This is an online learning center. It allows participants to take trainings at their leisure. You can take it whenever you want, nights, days, weekends. You can stop courses. We have over 33 trainings on the accelerator. We also have our training webpage on the New York City Accelerator website, which provides links to training partners like Urban Green Council and other training organizations. We also have educational materials beyond the primers on building systems, construction practices, best practices that we've noted throughout the process of working with other developers and building teams in the city, and much, much more. Next slide. To learn more about the Accelerator and get started, please feel free to reach out to our team of experts. Website is here. And if not, you can use the QR code as well. But thank you for listening, and I'm going to hand it back over to Joe.
Thanks, Mike. I'm going to turn it now over to our panelists who are going to introduce themselves. Crystal.
Hi, I'm Crystal Ng, Director of Sustainability at Curtis Ginsberg Architects. We are a woman-owned, can we advance the slide? Okay, thank you. We are a woman-owned architectural and planning firm based in New York City, founded on the commitment of sustainable, resilient, equitable, and community-oriented design for over 30 years. Our portfolio consists of mixed-use, mixed-income housing, as well as educational, cultural, and civic work. Sustainability is at the core of our practice, and we have designed over 30 plus buildings with LEED or Passive House certification. In case you haven't heard that much about Passive House before, it is a design standard that produces extremely comfortable buildings that use 60% less energy than conventional buildings, and it's tested and commissioned to a higher standard than code minimum buildings. And we have demonstrated we can build high performance buildings without much of a cost premium and on a limited budget. In 2020, we were recognized by the Ivory Prize for innovations in addressing Americans' affordable housing crisis for our portfolio of energy efficient multifamily housing that maintain low operational costs to continue the cycle of affordability. The key challenges for future proofing for practitioners is integrating sustainability on the onset of a project, and for architects to do some simply modeling to understand how the building performs. And there's many softwares and companies available to integrate that into the practice today. And regulations are changing more rapidly. So even our Office of 40, it's challenging to get all teams updated. We have increased our internal knowledge sharing, and from things that we learn from our energy consultants, engineers, and contractor in the integrative design process with our LEED and Passive House projects, we've developed best practices for all our other jobs. You know, we also attend great resources that's available through the Urban Council, New York City Accelerator, and those can fill anybody's day. And from a building perspective, changing energy sources and making decisions not to use the cheapest energy source, but instead the most efficient and renewable system is a hard transition that we understand. That's a challenge for the city as well as individual developers, but there are many more options there in heat pump technologies, case studies in geothermal systems, and more integrated PV options than there was even 5 years ago. And I look forward to discussing those issues more with the other panelists. I'll turn it back to Joe.
Thank you, Crystal. Next up, we're going to hear from Sam Mason. Sam, are you able to unmute yourself?
I am able to unmute. I'm not sure if my camera is going to work this morning because I'm on my phone. So
we can, yeah, I think we can see you.
You can, okay.
Yeah.
I don't see it on my phone, so that's fine. So anyway, yeah, welcome everyone. My name is Sam Mason. I'm the director for Decarb at CodeGreen. Little background, I'm a professional engineer focused in mechanical systems. Also have a heavy background in energy modeling. And I also sit on 90.1 on the code standard development side. So a little bit about CodeGreen. We do a little bit of everything with regards to your buildings. If your building is using energy and there's data in your building, we probably touch it at some point. The real focus we're seeing now, as per the discussion today, is around decarbonization and around this resiliency and future proofing in buildings. So we aim to impact buildings at sort of all phases of design through new construction and ongoing operations. So what I'd like to talk about today, and what we'll discuss with Crystal and Jennifer on the call today, is about this idea of future-proofing resiliency. And one of the questions we usually find is where to start, right? And I think Michael pointed out that meeting code minimum right now is not necessarily going to make sure that you meet the 97 requirements in the future for carbon emission requirements. So there is some some interesting dichotomies there of like, hey, you're meeting energy code, but in 5 years from now, you're going to end up with some fairly large carbon emission fines. So we tend to respond to that as start analyzing your buildings early on, as early as you possibly can, particularly in new construction where you don't have the limitations of an existing building, where you don't have limitations around facades or other space constraints. So very similar to what Crystal was just saying about analyzing early, that is our push, and particularly in the new construction realm, that really is where we like to be started, before the project has even been conceptualized. And then, we'll talk more today about this future proofing and debunking some myths and things that are out there as to what people are talking about. There's a lot of talk. There's not a lot of particularly concrete next steps that the city has sort of agreed upon, or that 90.1 or IECC has agreed upon. So we'll talk through some of that today as well. So next slide, just quickly shows the CodeGreen in terms of what we do. We have about 650 million square feet under management for data management. We support 165 billion in assets through all of our clients in terms of their investments. So that's their buildings and ESG. And LEED certified space, we've been doing that for roughly 17 years. And so we've got 120 million square feet certified as of today. Next slide, please. And so just, again, we'll come back to this a little bit, but this is really where we think about this idea of future-proofing and resiliency is start analyzing early, right? And the earlier you do it, the more impact you can have. The later you start this, which is when we usually get a call for somebody to ask, oh, can you do, LEED model, or can you do New York City code compliance? They're usually calling in construction documents. And at that point, there's really no way to impact design, right? It really is a documentation exercise. So where we see the push for resiliency is that you can get cost-effective solutions if you start early, right? And you look at the interactive effects of all the different building systems. You look at downsizing equipment, you look at facade performance, but that really has to happen, concept phase or pre-schematic phase. That you really can't wait much longer. So anyway, we'll leave it at that. That's look forward to speaking with everyone today.
Thank you, Sam. Next up, we're going to hear from Jennifer Urrutia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Urrutia, a project manager over at Lendlease. While I'm a project manager at the moment, overseeing the day-to-day of subcontractors, I have spent the last 10 years dedicated purely to sustainability within construction. So my focus on sustainability previously has been valuable in leveraging now the day-to-day of how can we implement standard practices with sustainability in how we approach construction at the moment, as well as pushing the bar to take it to the next step. So a little background of Lendlease, I think it's helpful just for the context of the role that we play in the conversation. So I'm on the construction arm of Lendlease, but we also have development. We're globally headquartered in Australia, but we've been in New York for more than 40 years. So we have a lot of experience primarily with new construction. We do different renovations as well, but we are the #1 with new building. And some projects being highlighted on the next page will show you some of our portfolio that we have in New York. So moving to the next slide, you'll see some images and different buildings you might recognize. So we have multifamily here. I'm currently on the 310 Hudson project in Lower Manhattan. It's a commercial property with 2 towers and a podium in the middle. It takes up an entire city block. And the podium in the middle is on the skylight, we have solar panels. So we're producing some solar energy over here on the job site, which is very valuable for not just the user, but also for, you know, our trades just being more experienced in installing it and the comfortability of making it more normal on the way we build buildings. So Lendlease, on the next page, we are really advanced in what we do with sustainability. We take it very seriously and we manage what we have control over and really set high goals for ourselves. So we have a current target of being absolute zero by 2040. We have a roadmap of how we're achieving this, focusing on scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So scope 1 being the fuels that we burn. We try to electrify as much equipment as possible on our job site. So our job sites are not producing as much emissions as perhaps other job sites. And this has helped contributing to the overall carbon impact of the building. So we're reducing emissions on the job site. On a project that we have in Chicago, we actually have solar panels that are helping power the building when it comes to the actual construction that we're doing to offset those emissions. And we also have a team in-house that researches and helps procure materials that have a lower carbon intensity, embodied carbon. So we are able to control what we, you know, have these few measures. A lot of it, you know, in how we view emissions comes from the design side of it, and we try to take that to the next step of what the contractor can do. And with that, I'll pass it back over to Joe.
Great. Thank you, Crystal, Sam, and Jennifer. Before we get into our panel discussion, I just want to remind everyone who's joined us today that following the panel discussion, we will have some time for Q&A. So, you know, during the discussion, if any questions come up, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to type in your questions. You can also upvote any of those questions if somebody's already, you know, asking a question that you want answered. So please use that Q&A option and we'll get to your questions after the discussion. So moving into the panel discussion, I think Mike from Accelerator did a great job of introducing the landscape in New York City for new construction and some of the drivers that are pushing the construction industry to pursue buildings that are surpassing code in, you know, in many instances, just to keep pace with the new laws, policies, and initiatives that the city and the state are putting out. The largest drivers of those for New York City are Local Law 97, which in 2030 will require pretty stringent emissions limits for all buildings over 50,000 square feet, or actually, sorry, 25,000 square feet. And then also Local Law 154, which is requiring any new buildings to be basically fully electric. And so that phases in for larger buildings, I believe in 2027. So thinking of, you know, designing, constructing new buildings, you know, based on current New York City Energy Conservation Code, and then the future phase-in of Local Law 97, Local Law 154, how are we future-proofing New York City's buildings? I'm going to turn this over to Sam. Where do you start with future-proofing your buildings given these regulations? Sam, can you unmute yourself?
Maybe. Sorry. Great question, and we sort of, everybody I think touched on it a little bit already. You know, again, for early design buildings, you know, to get started as early as possible and look at you know, opportunities and synergies between different systems to try to reduce first cost, which obviously is a huge driver. But to also focus on reducing loads in the building. And I think, it's been something we've talked about for many years of, facade sort of first approach. And while that generally is the approach that we try to take, it ends up being the most cost, the piece of the building that ends up costing the most. So it ends up generally getting put on the VE list. So what we like to do is make sure that we're looking at future code development. So look at what's actually in the energy standards as of today, like say the 2022 IECC and 90.1 as guidance of where things will be going, right? So that's say 6 to 8 years ahead of where we currently are in New York City right now. And that will help people, drive this extra efficiency step beyond current code that Michael was referring to. So a lot of that has to do with efficiency of systems, performance of facades. And then, the other thing is the question of electrification, right? Is that, there will be this push towards electrification. We're finding that it is a very cost prohibitive item, but to look at, future planning for that and making sure that you have the ability to, bring in extra electrical service when it becomes available from Con Ed if you don't have it right now. So to be able to look at, adding heat pumps to a system later in life, considering modular approach. And, one other thing I guess that has come up is we've had it thrown at us we should oversize systems today for 20 years in the future. Really we should be looking at right sizing equipment today. And when we hit end of life, look at what the most efficient equipment is then, because we know that equipment is getting more efficient over time. So we kind of try to, keep first cost down today, and look at your goal of whether it's 97 or whether it's, utility cost or whatever it may be. So.
Thanks, Sam. I'm gonna ask Crystal the same question from like an architecture and design standpoint. Where do you start with future-proofing buildings?
Yeah, I agree with most of the things that Sam said. Like, we really can't do our energy efficient work without some form of modeling. Obviously, more advanced modeling would go to our energy consultants, but internally we do use softwares because I think as architects, we can't just passively receive feedback from someone else because we are the main facilitators. So we need to know what those different levers are, and the energy modeling and playing with the different system when you're looking at increasing insulation and how does that affect your heating cooling load, and could we reduce that? And that helps us better explain to the clients, really, I think from our firm's perspective, we're just shifting things into different buckets rather than adding on to make energy efficient buildings. We're just shifting the bucket to insulation and windows rather than spending that on mechanical systems. And we have been able to demonstrate that really there's almost no cost impact. It's just a way of thinking and a way of explaining your design to someone else. And when you do that, you also do produce healthier buildings. And that is also something to speak towards, if it's an educational facility or if it's homes for people, that's a really critical factor as well. And I think we found that the passive house framework is pretty good in helping us internally design and explain that, because we are focusing on those passive windows, envelope components. And then we'll move on to ERVs or passive ventilation to further reduce the load. And then you have a really efficient mechanical system. And then you could talk about, adding on-site generation and maybe details of doing renewable geothermal for your heating, cooling systems. And we always plan with efficiencies in mind, because efficiencies does save on those first costs. And it does save you in the long run because you're not losing extra heat if you have extra duct branches. So we really, I think that's a main focus too in, future proofing, being efficient and looking forward.
Thanks, Crystal. And Jennifer, what about in a construction phase, is there any way to add in additional measures or to change things once, projects are in a development construction phase? Can you add additional measures that, maybe a new policy or law is passed or code has changed, what are you able to do, in that phase to, increase the project's overall efficiency or standards?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think at the moment, a lot of codes are focused on the operational aspect of the building, where we're going to see more codes focus on, the embodied carbon of the materials going in the building, as well as emissions produced during the construction phase. And so a lot of the codes, I think, have been exploring, emissions from construction as well as embodied carbon, but in construction and having that framework and background of what works and what doesn't is very useful for the present time. So when the codes are in effect, that, it is like an aspect to be able to mobilize. So that kind of goes back, I guess, to the emissions produced during construction, electrifying as much equipment as possible. So we're reducing, the emissions from the job site and understanding logistical challenges with that, where maybe you need, 2 excavators on the job site versus 1 because the battery will run out on 1 during a day. And so by being familiar in the moment with how these different types of equipment works, I think is very valuable. We're also exploring more of battery storage and using that for our job sites when it comes to the equipment. And then, for the embodied carbon aspect, I think, a lot more discussion with like the structural engineering part of it, and making them, somewhat like aware of embodied carbon of the materials that they're speccing, and us being familiar with what would have a lower embodied carbon that we could use today has been valuable, primarily with concrete and steel being perhaps the more advanced at the moment.
Thanks, Jennifer. And New York City Mayor Adams signed Executive Order, I think 23 back in September, requiring city construction agencies to require low carbon concrete and reduction in emissions from construction. So, that's definitely happening within the city. So seeing that as a trend that will, move into private construction as well, definitely helps having that foresight to help plan. So turning this now to everyone, what are, some of the best practices and what are you communicating to owners and developers, as the priority for them to think about in future proofing and designing their buildings?
Yeah, I'll kick us off. I mean, in our discussions with different building stakeholders, I mean, one of the things we're seeing is it's like all or nothing approach to electrification. And so one of the things that we've really been talking to folks that are participating through the accelerator on is this idea I mentioned in my presentation of making small incremental changes to your projects, and that way, as we're moving towards like local law 154, there's certain challenges around things like even like domestic hot water systems that we've been hearing that the economics of the systems don't work right now. That's fine. I mean, the way that local law 154 is rolling out, it's phased, it's addressing the barriers around electric hot water, but there's other things that developers can start adding into their projects today that can, as we start to move forward and get closer to the local law 154 timeline and milestones that are set, that once it is law, once it is the law of the land in the city, developers will know how to do it. And so it's this like, well, I don't have to do it till it's actual law, so I'll just wait. Well, that's great, but there's also the opportunity now to kind of begin to take like small, bite-size, manageable, practices that you can put into construction. So one of the things we try to, when we're talking to development teams, is like what we've been hearing from other people that are already doing the work in the city is, again, manageable, small, like doesn't have to be done all at once. So to me, that's one of the biggest best practices that we can provide and we've been able to provide, is that, again, you shouldn't wait till it's law. you should start to implement some of this stuff now. And then that way, once it is law, you're already there. And it also gives you a leg up on your competitors too, if you're a developer who's looking to build more work in the city. So
Thanks, Mike. Anybody else want to contribute of best practices, especially, informing developers or building owners up front, how to get them to plan or to accept, maybe a small incremental cost, to achieve these future standards?
Yeah.
Sure.
Oh,
Go ahead.
go ahead,
Go
Sam.
ahead. Go ahead,
Okay.
Crystal.
Okay, I'll just, because I'm gonna piggyback off of a little bit what Michael said, like, I think that strategy has worked with our clients because we did first start with just electrifying heating and cooling. Now there is more availability in domestic hot water, so we're getting, that's kind of like our current design is all electric because we've mastered the heating, the hot water side. And then we've also been exploring wastewater recovery systems, so then we can further reduce the energy that we're using in heating hot water. That's kind of like the new thing that we're exploring right now. And then I guess my advice to kind of ownership is to get them more engaged in the commissioning process, because I think you do learn a lot in that commissioning of what is working, what might be the flaws of current day design. Like previously, before we focused on air leakage and doing those testings, we didn't know anything about how much air leakage we actually had. And now that is kind of changing our construction practices, right? Like all trades need to be aware they just can't puncture holes in our building. So I think that is pretty important for owners to understand, as well as that will help your operation and management in the future. If you also integrate some energy management systems, like you can see where the leaks are occurring or where the failures are occurring in your mechanical systems to fix them right away, so you don't like lose any heat. I mean, yeah, you don't waste any funds in things that are not working.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sam.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, commissioning is where I was going to head things, but back to what Michael said is, planning early and looking at, the lifetime of the building, right? We're building buildings for 50 plus years. So understanding if you're holding assets or, whether this is something that you might be, selling or leasing or whatever else, is look at planning for your CapEx, projects over the course of time. So if it's new construction, understanding that in 20 years, you're going to have replacements, understanding what those might look like. But as of today, I'd say the one sort of piece that gets looked over a lot is exactly what Crystal said, is the commissioning aspect, that it's more or less like a checkbox solution right now, right? People are checking it. They get a big report, they probably never open it. But there is a lot of operational efficiency that's being lost by not actually following up on the commissioning process. And so the envelope, as Crystal noted, that is becoming more and more part of a commissioning scope where we're actually doing envelope commissioning, ensuring tightness of systems, not just the windows themselves, but the whole wall system. And then sort of the general commissioning of your mechanical systems. Usually it's a one and done kind of situation, but what we're finding now from owners as projects right now are getting into operation is we're coming back every 3 months and we're looking at how the building operates over the seasons, right? So it's not just that initial set when you run the building. That might be in the summer when you did the final commissioning, but you don't know how the building's going to operate in the fall and the winter. And so what we're finding now is that we actually have an ongoing sort of commissioning contract with owners to come back and make sure the building is operating efficiently in all seasons. And it's not just a 1 year thing either. I mean, we're kind of like looking, 2-3 years out to make sure that the operators know how to build the buildings, they know how to operate the building, they know how to look for inconsistencies in where there could be energy loss in the building as well. So it's more of a engaged 12 to say 24 month process on commissioning instead of just a handover report.
Thanks, Sam. And Crystal, I think commissioning is hugely important in ensuring that buildings are achieving the standards they set out to, but also that they're continuing to over time, reducing any premature equipment replacements needed in the building. So that's one way to overcome some of the challenges. Jennifer, what are some of the other challenges that New York City's construction community are facing with future-proofing buildings?
Yeah, absolutely. So a little bit as well, I guess, tying into what Crystal and Sam said. One thing that we have as a role that we could be doing as well as a contractor is maybe, the owner isn't thinking about something, and I think just engaging that conversation with them and making them aware of certain actions that they could do is also very valuable. So I guess just speaking from, issues that we do experience on our side that I think is just sometimes valuable to share and, overcome is, so I think there's some sort of caution that people have when it comes to Con Ed and the amount of electricity that they're willing to deliver to a building, and the load letters, as a back and forth with them. And I think as our experience here, that's sometimes viewed as a challenge, but at the same time, Con Ed is very responsive to helping electrify, the buildings that are in new construction at the moment. Our current project right now, we have worked with the engineers to develop like the load we anticipate being required to be delivered to the building. And we did this for both, during construction as our temp power as well as the permanent power. So for the temp power during construction, we requested a higher amount. It's given something slightly lower than that. And in the end, it proved to be more than viable for what we needed to complete. And so I think sometimes maybe if Con Ed doesn't provide that load that you're requesting, and they recalculate to give you the load that they think that you actually need, has been working so far. So that's something that can be viewed as a challenge, but actually, so far has been okay as far as during construction. As far as like the use during the building, it's calculated on our end engineering wise from the highest peak expected, where that highest peak expected is not going to be used every day. And so that's why we're given something a little bit lower. But then kind of to Sam's point earlier when he brought up Con Ed, it's something that, we should be designing as well for like what we have at the moment. And I think that's going to kind of help everyone else electrify as well.
Thanks. Mike, I want to hear from you. New York City Accelerator is, a free resource to the buildings community and often a first point of contact for questions and inquiries of, what buildings should do. What are some of the challenges that you're seeing with people that engage the Accelerator for their buildings?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what the panelists have brought up, I think are good challenges that we're seeing that need to be overcome in the city. I think one of the biggest things like Crystal brought up is you can't train enough people that are part of the building team. And, we forget sometimes that as building professionals that we should also think about like the actual people on the construction site that are actually doing the work and making sure they understand and they have buy-in on the importance of, making sure that as we're training people closest to the tool belt, that they understand that like leaving one area unaddressed that could create like infiltration problems and create areas where there's air leakage. And just because it was a missed opportunity, they don't realize how big of a missed opportunity that is once the project is completed and the impact it can have on a building. And so I think training, engagement of all stakeholders on projects, making sure again that from the top to the people that actually on the construction site understand and have buy-in on why this is important. I also think obviously the biggest thing we're hearing too is financing. There's a massive need for financing. The incremental cost difference between building to code and building beyond code and future-proofing your project. I think when people are sitting down and they're saying, yes, but we want a building that 50 years from now, and a lot of people's attitude is, well, I'll be dead in 15 years. I'm not really worried about the impacts this building will have, like how it'll be impacted by a local law. And so I think that's the other thing is like the ownership piece, the long-term ownership of these projects that we're working with. A lot of people who are involved aren't looking at these as long-term investments and long-term paybacks. They're looking at very short-term paybacks and short-term short windows to make it cost effective, like a measure when they're looking to implement it. So I think hopefully that, within time, as electrification and decarbonization become a focus to the utilities as well, like Con Edison, that more and more rebate incentive programs will become available. But for right now, a lot of the costs to meet code or exceed code or meet local laws is just really passed on at the end of the day to the building owner, operator, developer, whoever we're working with. So yeah, I mean, I think those are the two key areas we're hearing the most about, is like the need for training, making sure that folks on the site know and have buy-in from all stakeholders, and then the financing piece and rebates.
Thanks, Mike. And aside from the New York City Accelerator as a resource, opening this up to other panelists, what are some of the other opportunities and resources that are out there for building owners and developers looking for either technical expertise and advice or best practices? I mean, where are they accessing this information? Sam, maybe you have some insight on this.
Yeah, I mean, I they go to firms like our firm, or there's similar other firms in the city, right, that kind of look at the whole process, and kind of look at the whole financial picture. I guess that's the one thing, I think it's shifted away from. I would say that there is the short term, like what Michael had said about people making short term decisions, but I'd say the majority of our developers and owners we work with, they're looking at 25, 30 years. Like that is their time frame, because they're going to hold these projects. So having them look at the financial analysis over that time, and whether whoever you're using for your consultant to do that, they should be looking out, and they should be weighing the first cost against, say, upgrading your facade against a potential fine down the road. Like a $20,000 fine per year is probably not worth the $20 million investment in a facade, right? So trying to help them just put apples to apples on these decisions that are going to come up, and they might come up early and you might have to change them later, but helping them look at the whole financial picture. So I do think the finance piece is, certainly where we get a lot of sticking problems right now. And I do think that, engaging early with Con Ed, engaging early with NYSERDA are both sort of key to understand what is changing in the incentive market and the funding market that's out there.
Yeah, and to kind of add on to that too. So Lendlease also has a development project over in Greenpoint using geothermal energy as the main source of energy for the building, and they were able to receive a large grant from the state. So I do feel like there's also a lot of state and city-wide opportunities as far as supporting what type of implementation that we're doing in this field.
And potentially more, coming online soon, hopefully, in terms of incentives offered through the state. Crystal, I want to turn this to you. Mike had said earlier, that making people aware of what the regulations and laws are, so that they can make these decisions early, is a huge benefit. What would you say is, like, in clients that come to you, how many are aware? Like, how much do you have to kind of educate people about what the laws and regulations are, especially around like 97 and energy code as a driver for this?
Yeah, so I would say a lot of our clients, because they are gonna be owning and operating this for long term, are aware, but they don't really know what it means to them, right? So it is kind of like demystifying the process for them. And also we had to overcome that learning curve as well. We do simple modeling to see what our energy use is and our energy use intensity. And I would say a really helpful tool has been the Building Energy Exchange Local Law 97, because we can easily plug that in, and then we can kind of figure out like the projections of the buildings and what the fee, and that is a useful tool to have in your toolkit while you're explaining to your owners and clients, like, well, this is what happened if I were to just do a decent envelope today and decent systems today. And then the other option would be to make that investment today And then you could, you would see that you could actually show what the benefits are. So I think the local law 97 is very helpful to do that. And yeah, I think it's just the changing of mentality and phrasing the issues like a different way, and where it's like, yes, you are making these initial investments. There is some savings in these investments that you're making in the energy efficiency of the envelope and systems, and you would have long-term benefits and long-term savings from that.
Thanks, Crystal. And I'll turn this next question out to everyone. What are some of these other misconceptions that you're seeing about, needing to comply either, currently to current code versus something that, could be in the future? So what are some of these misconceptions that, clients and owners and developers are coming with? And, what are you doing to help, set things straight for them?
Sure, I can quickly touch on it and then I'll pass it on to everybody else. I think the one thing that we see is that, and then we've said it probably multiple times, but I think it's good to say it again, is that meeting current energy code does not necessarily mean you're going to be exempt from 97 fines. And I think there's a disconnect to understand that, the 97 is a future target that is going to require, investment in your building. If it's new construction today, you probably need to be designing to, beyond the 2022 code already. So I think just the same thing as Crystal had said, is just educating your client as to what 97 is. It is an operational, energy consumption and carbon emissions associated with those, whereas code compliance is a, fixed set of assumptions, right? You could build a model to do code compliance that might have nothing to do with how your building actually operates in the future. So there is some disconnect, and a lot of that is just the education component with your clients.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I would definitely say that I think it's just a lot of misconceptions around the building code itself. I think it also just has to do with the fact that everyone interprets it differently. The way it's sometimes enforced varies. And so I think that just builds more and more misinformation out there on what the codes are and what local law 97 is, what buildings are impacted, how the effects of 154 is going to be, if there's enough energy out there to power these buildings. And so I think the big thing is providing enough information and resources, especially third-party resources that kind of almost bring an unbiased view of codes, of local laws. And I think that's one of the things that we always try to stress is we're not code enforcers. We're not the person that ultimately will be finding your buildings. We're here to provide you that unbiased third party resource to be able to and again, I'd encourage everyone. I've worked with several people on this panel, but anyone can participate in the accelerator, especially for the new buildings track. So it's not just like you have to be a building owner or a developer. You can be repping a building. You can be working as a designer, as architect, engineer. You can bring us those projects on behalf of your clients, and then maybe then loop your client in and say, here, we've done this research, we've looked into this, and here's what we can provide you. And I think that helps having and overcoming some of the misconceptions out there on having those resources. But I think that's the big thing in any market. I think comes down to the codes and just the overall understanding and the way they're applied, especially if they're not applied equally. We've heard obviously some challenges where, again, that subject to interpretation part of codes is really kind of really creates a lot of confusion. So
Thanks. So it sounds like, having that discussion early on and then talking about projections and planning for the future is, really what's beneficial for owners and developers, and to engage in that discussion early, to have a long-term view of the building, is really what's become incredibly important with future proofing for new construction. We're going to open this up now to the Q&A. So starting with a question from Manuel Ferrer, what is the largest passive house to date in New York City? And are there any planned large multifamily passive houses in New York City? I'm not sure if the Cornell Tech dorm is so far still the largest passive house to date, but maybe I'll turn this to Crystal or Jennifer and ask, are you seeing any developers coming to you wanting to design passive house?
Oh, yeah, so I'm not totally sure which is the largest one because they do keep getting bigger and bigger. Yeah, we do still have inquiries about new passive house, and we are currently working on several multifamily passive house. They are yeah, they're pretty large scale now for New York City. I think they're like 200 units in them. So yeah, we are still seeing interest, particularly in the affordable housing market, which we work a lot in. And, and we also do get grants from NYSERDA as part of their early design excellence. So if you were trying to, push the envelope, there are additional assistances even to like technical design teams.
Thanks, Crystal. Jennifer, you want to add anything to that? Is Lendlease doing any passive house?
Yeah, that is a good question. We have our in-house team that is passive house certified when it comes to the buildings. So from the contractor side, we're becoming more experienced in building buildings like that. I can't speak upon the size of any at the moment.
Thanks. A next question, what is the most important distinction between future-proofing a building and a high-performance building? And why is it important to future-proof beyond just meeting local laws? And how do you convince small business owners to spend the extra money today for events in the future? So maybe taking the first part of that question, what's the difference between a future-proofed building and a high-performance building? I don't know, Sam, do you want to take a stab at that?
Sure. I mean, they could be one and the same, but I guess there could be energy efficient buildings that are not future proof per se. I guess considering the gas moratorium coming in the city, right? If you were future proofing the plan for no gas in your building and you built a super efficient building with cogen in it, you're kind of set up that you're going to have to make changes. So it might be super efficient in terms of day one operation, but it might not necessarily be future proofed or resilient for the future. So there could be some variation. Generally, I think they align fairly well, right? You're designing energy efficiency. That is a future proof. It is a resilient design guideline. So.
And why, I think we've heard from this a little bit, but maybe if somebody just wants to reiterate why it's important to future proof beyond just meeting current local laws.
I mean, I think the current laws and regulations will continually increase and change, right? And the construction process is a long lead time process. So if you just design for today, like you might not meet like tomorrow, especially if tomorrow is performance based and not just looking at the criteria of the design. And I think we did talk a little bit about how right now the building code is not a very good metric of building performance. It's just kind of criteria that you're hitting, like the contracts that we're using, but code is going to change. Like it is going to be more performance based in future cycles. So I think that's why we are talking about future proof today, because what we know today is going to change.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Crystal. I mean, the performance-based piece of this is something that we stress again. It's part of market transformation is that, prescriptive codes are great to do the bare minimum. That's what they're set up to do, is provide the bare minimum. So where you have a performance-based code, or where we've seen performance-based codes that are implemented in other states, what you see is like you have trade-offs, you have the ability to look at how a building's actually going to perform. So I totally agree with you. I think that's one of those areas too, that codes are always going to be changing. So it only makes sense to kind of stay ahead of the curve. And I think that's one of the things that we stress as well, is and we've been having lots of discussions around performance-based construction. So
Yeah, and I think Michael, you already touched base on this, but it does make your firm marketable if you're saying it's your design firm, because the gap is going to widen, and if you delay, you're just going to have to catch up further. I mean, to catch up today is already a task in itself, so it's probably not best to push it off.
Yeah, and I'll just tag on there for one thing. For the buildings that we're working on now, we usually run a scenario like when we do a full building model, either calibrated for existing or a new construction model. We will build a code compliant model that meets current NYC ECC 2020, and we look at how that compares to local law 97. 90% of the buildings built today to code will have fines in 2030 that we have in our set. So just meeting the bare minimum means you're still going to be exposed to fines in the future. So I guess that's another reason to look further out into design beyond code, is that there will be financial penalties associated with not operating your building efficiently and not designing it efficiently today.
And that might answer the last part of that question about how do you convince, owners to spend that extra money today to make sure they're meeting, the codes and standards of the future, is that, if they're not making that investment today, they'll probably end up paying, a few years down the road when those fines come into play. So being able to make those financial projections for them now and make them aware of the, any penalties that they would face in the future is probably a good justification for why they would need to make these extra investments upfront.
Agreed.
The next question, does an owner need to be part of the team who approaches the accelerator for assistance? So Mike, that's a question for you.
yeah, no. So again, anyone can approach the accelerator with a project, depending on, as long as they've got a project that's either new construction. This is sort of the buildings track that I oversee. So new construction, Alt 1, we do some work on Alt 2 projects as well. But again, it can be a design professional, can be an engineer, can be anyone. We had one person reach out to us because they had a 99-year ground lease on a project, and they were the ground lease holder, and they were interested to figure out before they started to put their lot up for bid, I guess is what they were doing with it. But basically they wanted to make sure whatever building went on there was going to be future proofed. I mean, literally that's what the guy mentioned to us, because he knew these buildings are going to be there for a long period of time, and he wants to make sure that they're going to not be abandoned, especially as fines start to hit them. And so he wanted to learn more about local law 97, and then we discussed 154 with him. So again, can be anyone who's got a project or working on a project. You don't have to be the permit holder. We'll work with you. And again, also the accelerator provides assistance on existing buildings and also high performance retrofit buildings as well.
Thanks, Mike. Next question, have any of you had trouble with sourcing electric equipment for heating and cooling, for hot water heating, or space heating?
We haven't had any issues to date in terms of getting mechanical equipment like heat pumps, VRF, modular heat pumps. I think the supply chain issues that we saw before have sort of mitigated, but I think we are planning, an extra 3 or 4 months ahead of time. I don't know, Jennifer, you might have a better feeling on this from in the construction realm, but we haven't seen it right now.
Yeah, we haven't seen it either as far as what's being permanently used in the building. Yeah, like for construction purposes, we use temp heating quite often. Obviously in New York, it gets cold during the winter months. And if we're pouring concrete in the winter months, we have to rely on the temp heating to cure the concrete. And so sometimes having the available power for that, and it could be a challenge, and doing that efficiently as well is something that we are continuing to research, is how do we have temp power in the winter months to cure the concrete without using a substantial amount of energy. And so that's, I guess, not the exact question, but it's kind of pertaining to the same, equipment being used just at a different time period.
Yeah, and then one thing I would just add is that through the accelerator, we do a lot of outreach and try to meet with manufacturers and different like different manufactured products, including like heat pump hot water heaters. And the only thing we've been hearing, I think Sam just touched upon, is that the supply chain issues have pretty much gone away with at least the technology. We have heard that there's been some delay on getting storage tanks for those systems, but again, I think that within time you'll see that also go away. But for right now, we've actually been trying to keep our fingers on the pulse. We don't want to make recommendations of certain technologies if they're not available. So we try to stay as engaged with the manufacturing groups of different building products, just so we're out there promoting them. We want to make sure that they're readily available.
Thanks. This next question for Jennifer, what changes, with the changes that you mentioned, how long has it taken to implement them across a project?
So this might be changes pertaining to electrifying equipment. Trying to think what other changes this might be referencing. But I suppose when it comes to what we're doing during construction, so for instance, we are electrifying equipment. We're starting to account for and recognize which subs have electrified equipment that they could use. It's sometimes like medium duty equipment that they'll have. So that's becoming more common, fortunately. So if the sub does have this medium duty electric equipment available that they could use on the job site, we make sure that they're implementing it and using it when possible. And we also track this throughout construction to help mitigate any of the emissions being generated. At the next level we're trying to take it to that may not be available is, or as easily available locally, is alternative fuels when it comes to our, different like generators we'll use on site. So now the next step is procuring alternative fuels, whether it's like, biodiesel for our on-site equipment that cannot be electrified, is to now mitigate towards the alternative fuel usage.
Thanks. Next question, with codes and local laws changing so fast, what are the resources that you all are using to keep up with new information? How do you kind of stay ahead of the curve, or potentially even try to predict where the next laws and codes are going to go?
I could say, at least just for the energy code, I sit on 90.1, and so I kind of see where the development is from 2019, 2022. We're planning for 2025 right now. So I use that as a gauge of where things are going, because that has a massive stakeholder involvement across the entire US. And there's pretty heavy presence from New York City on that. But, and being involved in these kind of events, like with the Accelerator and Urban Green Council, there's a lot of information that's out there that's being presented through that as it becomes available. So attending seminars like this and engaging with consultants that are sort of, in the different groups, in the BOMA groups and the other sort of energy advisory groups as well, is usually a good way to stay ahead of it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And we do have some staff that do sit on code committees, and that's definitely a great gauge. We also do use like a lot of webinar from Urban Green Council. Also, there's the Passive House Accelerator. So we actually do a lot of the passive house circles a lot. So that's also very helpful to like see what new technologies that people are using.
Yeah, and then shameless plug for the Accelerator training website page and Accelerator Learning Center. We try to keep those up to date as possible. We try to keep our technical guidance documents up to date as possible. So we try to be a good singular point of contact for this information. But I think to Crystal and Sam's point as well, I think that because the code cycle goes out so many years that this is publicly, for the most part, once the codes are starting to roll out, you can get this information. And I like Sam's approach, which is like, like Crystal mentioned this earlier, new codes are going to continuously change. We're going to continuously adopt them. So if you know what's coming 4 to 6 years from now, then why not just build to that or start to implement those into your building design? So.
And I would say it's also very important to talk to your product reps because like we do need to change the market more rapidly and have more options out there. So the more that design professionals ask of their reps, hopefully the more that we'll see online because it is sometimes like when you're trying to be ahead of the curve, it is hard to find those specs in like even the different equipment, or if we're looking into embodied carbon now, like we are starting to do more research in that field and just getting those, EPDs for the structures is difficult because sometimes the components are like the element itself is a very complex component that the manufacturers do need to spend time to research to provide that type of information.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest, driver as well of the code being enacted is the fact that the demand is growing stronger and we're proving that these, available technologies or materials are available. And that's only going to help provoke the code to go further because it is available. And so because of this demand that is growing, it's just perpetuating, the ability to actually meet these standards and performances.
Thanks. Next question is about buildings, large buildings that are using steam turbine cooling. And, whether local law 97 will require these steam units to be replaced with electric cooling. And, will Con Ed provide the increase in load to assist that? So maybe, are any of you seeing that, conversion from steam cooling equipment to all electric equipment? And then, are there challenges to getting the, Con Ed load letter if the building needs an increase in capacity?
I can take that to start and then anybody else can add in. It's good that somebody brought up district steam. It is a interesting conundrum in New York City. There is, Con Ed has said they're looking to decarbonize the steam system. We don't know what that actually means, but they are looking for it to be less carbon intensive than it is today, with the intent that it'll be part of the solution to get to the city's requirements for carbon reduction goals. Specific to, steam chillers, whether they're absorbers or steam turbine driven ones, we have 2 projects under construction now that have done basically a replacement to an electric unit. For the most part, we didn't have any issue with kind of getting load letter for that. They're fairly large buildings, over 1 million square feet. I will say they didn't go to a full electric solution because most the owners in both cases wanted to keep steam as sort of a backup source. They aren't 100% sold on having a 100% electric building for building of that size in the worst heating condition, right? And that you might have a backup source of steam to still provide some heating in the building. So I haven't seen anybody's gone 100% that direction, but where they had maybe 2 absorbers and 2 electric machines, they might have gone to 3 electric machines and 1 absorber. So we're seeing a slow shift that direction. And no issues really with Con Ed right now in terms of loads for those.
Yeah, I can't say to the Con Ed, we have studied like, changing out steam systems to electric systems. And I think it is a design challenge to find where those new pathways to go if they don't align with, like, if they're not going to be changed over to a hydronic based system and it will be like a heat pump system. I think challenges on the design side as well.
Thanks. Another maybe technical question. Why are new commercial buildings such as office buildings not all passive house? Isn't it beneficial for a building that's already enclosed? What is the main reason developers don't create passive house buildings if ultimately it's a lower operational cost in the end?
Crystal, you want to go on that
one? I guess that's not the area that we usually do. So we don't really interface that much with commercial office property owners. So I'm not sure why they wouldn't, especially if they're going to be holding and managing. It does seem like a good way to go.
Yeah, I kind of feel like there's also a lack of information. I mean, we have had people, again, when we're working with teams on projects, when they do ask or we bring up passive house, there's a lot of people who don't know what it is, or what the why it's beneficial. And I think that's the big thing, is education. I also think then cost is the next, obviously, biggest challenge is going to be, there is additional cost associated with it. But that being said, there's lower operation costs, lower maintenance, more resilient building. So I think it's just for me, I think it's an education piece that people just need more education. I know that in other markets, I know like Connecticut, Massachusetts, there are programs to train more passive house professionals, to get more people who can go out there and do the passive house certification process. So definitely a area that I think we as a group could do better, educating the benefits behind passive house technology.
Sure. And I'll speak specifically to the commercial piece. When we're doing analysis for a new construction project, commercial, the load profile in a commercial building does not necessarily lend itself well to following passive house guidelines as related to the insulation thickness and the performance of the facade. And the reason being that there's a diminishing return in a commercial building when you start adding more and more insulation, because there is so much internal gain. There's a lot of computers, there's a lot of lighting, there's a lot of people, that really you get to a point where adding more insulation, as you would follow for passive house, to get to a passive house level, doesn't actually have any benefit to the building in terms of reducing energy consumption or utility cost or carbon emissions. So there is a point of diminishing returns that usually that's where the owner says, we're not going to go any further beyond that. I will say from an air testing point of view, that is something we're really trying to push on the envelope commissioning. And that is getting more traction of actually sealing your building better, because infiltration is one thing that has largely been unregulated. And building code officials don't really have a way to check it unless you provide them a test report. So that's what I'm seeing in the commercial space on that front as to why it's not going full passive house requirements.
Thanks. Next question. Electricity seems to be the main way to decarbonize buildings to meet the 2050 net zero goals. But is there a big use of solar, wind, or alternative energy sources? So maybe, converting heating, hot water and heating systems to electric seems to be, like a major strategy in future-proofing buildings. But how much are you seeing addition of like solar, alternative energy generation, or even battery in some of these projects?
Yeah, so I could just talk a little bit about what we're seeing. So yeah, I mentioned our project in Greenpoint with geothermal. So that's one aspect that we're doing as well for renewable. The project I'm on now and was on previously had solar. One had solar fins on the side of the building as well. So not just on the roof, but also on the facade of the building, which was giving us the ability to have more energy. So I think sometimes just like the building footprint tends to be the restriction when it comes to capturing as much solar energy as possible to power the building. We have been exploring more with battery storage and working with FDNY and like DOB is a pathway that we can move forward with having battery storage on the building and using that like throughout the operation. There is different concerns with like lithium ion and different like battery types to actually have on a building where it's safe and not concerns with the FDNY. And so that's something that we've also been exploring for during operation to have you have your solar panels and when at night and just like kind of like using this as like a backup storage. So that's something that's being explored as well.
All right, maybe we have time for one more question. This question comes from an architect who would like clarity on how Accelerator, CodeGreen, Lendlease offerings are different, but maybe what services should people come to you for? So maybe I can just, that this can be a final question for everyone on the panel, or sort of why would someone come to you, for your specific services. So maybe we can start with Crystal.
Yeah, I think the main reason why people do come to us, our clients come to us, is we do have a lot of experience in this energy efficient realm, and we have built up the portfolio, because I think sometimes the hesitancies with clients is like they feel like they're getting a new system, but they really aren't. Like, we can at least like ease their mind a little bit in that we've done them this before and it is proven. And even with our current clients, if we want to do something different, there is a little bit of hesitancy to do new things. But I think with the additional research and like just making sure that you kind of have all the bases covered, it's definitely a barrier that you could overcome.
Thanks. Jennifer?
Yes, absolutely. So Lendlease, for my arm, we're the construction side of it. We're also a developer, but from the construction aspect of it, we track all of our energy, water, and waste throughout construction. So we already have a baseline of what we're targeting to achieve and have measures in place to actually improve that. So we really try to work with the client and the architect to really improve the project, not just like during construction, but throughout the design phase of how during the operation it's going to be the most efficient for the client. So we have our own sustainability team to really work with you and improve as much as possible.
Thanks. Sam?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, so we are involved from day one through ongoing operation in the building. So I'd say people come to us to look for support around decarbonization, general sustainability consulting for certifications. But we aim to be long-term partners with owners, and that's really where we like to put ourselves, is that we're their we're the owner's rep, and we're their guidance all the way through the life of the building. So,
thanks. And Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is we're a resource. I mentioned earlier, it doesn't cost anything to participate in the accelerator. We are here to provide assistance. And again, I think one of the nice things about this panel is it's a nice cross section of the typical people that we work with on the accelerator. So each one of these people represent someone that we would work with, that we would help provide assistance to. So we're in a supportive role. We're here to support the market and support the city. And so, I think that this was a great final question to end on, for sure.
Great. Well, thank you to all of our panelists, and thank you to Urban Green. I'm going to turn this back over to Anushka to close us out.
A quick shout out to some upcoming events we have at Urban Green. So on July 10th, please join us for a webinar, Zoning for Decarbonization, where you can learn about the amendments in the City of Yes zoning proposal and how they'll make building decarbonization easier. And we also have the date set for our annual gala on October 5th. And you can register for both things at urbangreencouncil.org/events. And thank you to our speakers, to our moderator. This was a great event. I learned a lot. And thank you also to the Accelerator for partnering with us on this event. And please contact the Accelerator if you want more information about their new buildings offerings. And as a reminder, we'll have the recording of this event available soon on our website. And thank you everybody for attending. Thank you for asking good questions. And I hope you have a great day.